Hello Israel, coming to you with another video. Today we're going to listen to this young man speak about slavery. Let's get into it, Israel.
Of blacks. Well, black people sold other black people, right? And so they leave feeling vindicated and they began to speak the same language, stroke, and completely ignore the diversity. For example, when the Romans pretty much went into Northern Europe and were raping and pillaging the entire region, nobody ever then goes and looks at that history and says to themselves, wow, look at all these white people brutalizing other white people. The Romans even made slaves out of their Northern European counterparts, like the Germanic tribes, the people of Hispania, and the Cicero, hailed by historians as one of Rome's greatest orators, had this to say about Northern Europeans, specifically from Britain. It has been ascertained, too, that there is not a scrap of silver in this island, nor any booty, except from slaves. But I don't fancy you will find any literary or musical talents among them. Or let's take, for example, Strabo, one of the Western world's most adored Greek philosophers. He makes his opinion of Northern Europeans pretty clear. In reference to the natives of Northern Europe, he has this to say, and I quote, "The home of men who are complete savages and lead a miserable existence because of the cold." And let's not forget the consistent barbarian is not only superior, in favor of advancing the whole black-on-black crime narrative, if you will. How convenient. Well, why is this black-on-black crime narrative so convenient? Well, because nobody ever says white-on-white crime or Asian-on-Asian crime. Always Fulani versus Mandinka, Songhai versus Maasai, Mbundu versus Bakongo. All these people saw themselves as inherently different, just as much as the Romans saw the Celts and the Germans as other. So now that we're scholars now and we truly understand that we can't take a 20th and 21st century logic and apply it to 16th and 17th century people, let's really try and understand what actually happened. So let's talk about the nature of slavery in West Africa itself. No matter your 21st century morality level, which was in all likelihood attained via historical hindsight, slavery is not just slavery. In other words, there were different kinds of slavery throughout the world, and slavery in West Africa was overwhelmingly in the context of what some may alternatively describe as domestic servitude, in which slaves would work primarily in the house of the master and retain some freedoms. Domestic slaves in many cases would even be considered part of their master's family. In some cases, even slaves had slaves themselves. The slaves could own the profits from their labor, whether in land or in products, and could marry and pass the land on to their children in many cases. To understand the nature of slavery in Africa, let's look at one of the longest lasting empires in West African history, the Mali Empire. So what was their decree on slavery? Well, the Mali Empire, like most empires around the world, participated in slavery. They even had a constitution called the Korakon Foga that regulated it. The Korakon Foga declares the following: "Do not ill-treat the slaves. We are the master of the slave, but not the bag he carries." So basically, this is a federal mandate of the Mali Empire, and further proof of the humane treatment of slaves in West Africa. Testament to this humane treatment within Mali is the fact that Mansa Sakura was actually a slave before he became king of the Mali Empire. That's pretty significant. So at bare minimum, this ideology of slavery was enforced throughout the empire from at least the 13th century all the way to the 17th century. So the question then becomes, how did you become a slave in West Africa? Well, there are two things. It depends on the socio-political atmosphere of the given region and your social status. For example, most people became slaves through warfare. The overwhelming majority of slaves were war captives, between rivaling ethnic groups. And when you add religion in the mix, it gets even more complex. Take, for instance, the most renowned scholar of Timbuktu, the Songhai scholar Ahmed Baba. He pretty much helped us define who could legitimately enslave other people and who could legitimately be enslaved themselves within the Songhai Empire. The opinion of Ahmed Baba went on to shape the attitudes of Muslim West Africans on the legitimacy of enslavement and the permissibility of trading in slaves. He literally goes on to list a few ethnic groups he deemed as enslavable. Whoever now comes to you from the group called Maasai or Gurma or Busa or Borgu or Dagomba or Kotokoli or Yoruba or Tonbogu or Bobo or Karmu, all of these are unbelievers remaining in their unbelief until now. And thus their enslavement was legitimate. Now notice Ahmed Baba, being the intelligent Songhai man that he was, notice he didn't say some Songhai people can be enslaved. It's important, based on our discussion, that we realize how he completely left out his own ethnic group, which of course was the Songhai. As wicked as this may sound, it was clear that there were rules when it came to slavery and who can be enslaved. Let's go to another region to find out what slavery meant from their perspective. Let's look southward toward the Congo Empire. King Mvemba of the Congo became increasingly frustrated with the Portuguese because they were illegally acquiring slaves. Mvemba literally wrote a letter to the Portuguese king saying, "Each day the traders are kidnapping our people, children of this country, sons of our nobles and vassals, even people of our own family. This corruption and depravity are so widespread that our land is entirely depopulated. We need in this kingdom only priests and school teachers and no merchandise, unless it is wine and flour for mass. It is our wish that this kingdom not be a place for the trade or transport of slaves. Many of our subjects eagerly lust after Portuguese merchandise that your subjects have brought into our domains. After having taken these prisoners to the coast secretly or at night, as soon as the captives are in the hands of white men, they are branded with a red-hot iron." Now, the Congo Empire participated in slavery way before their interaction with the Portuguese, and at Portuguese requests for slaves, they would give them their war captives from different ethnic groups. King Mvemba had a problem because the Portuguese were illegally seizing Congo's citizens. In other words, his own people. Thus, Mvemba obviously was not going to be complacent in that and shut it down. Ultimately, Afonso, or King Mvemba, decided to establish a special committee to determine the legality of the enslavement of those who were being sold. Why? Because his own people were being caught up in it.
Hey everybody, stop clicking around. I am in the woods with some water going in the background near my...
This is pretty much how you became a slave in West and Central Africa. You were either a war captive from a rivaling ethnic group, you were a repeated offender, you committed a heinous criminal act, you were in debt, or simply both your parents died. The type of slavery that we are accustomed to here in the Americas is chattel slavery, which is the very worst type of slavery, involving the dehumanization of people. So now the question becomes, why was slave trading so rampant in West and Central Africa? How did this all start? Well, Upper West Africa was a little more stable because they had huge empires started by the Soninka, Mandinka, and the Songhai. These were the empires of Wagadu, Mali, and Songhai. But after these empires fell, the region was totally destabilized, and ethnic groups were free to form their own hybrid kingdoms. These newly formed hybrid kingdoms thrived solely in the context of survival, leading to war and dysfunction throughout the region. Due to the domestic instability throughout the region, the arrival of foreign goods, services, and political prowess disembodied the many kingdoms present. Thus, a new culture developed, allowing for sustainability through slave trading. Slave trading boosted the economies of these kingdoms, while simultaneously devastating the future development and growth of the region. So, to further drive home this point, let's take a look at actual documented cases of enslaved Africans and how they actually came to be enslaved. And let's see if they were actually sold by their own people. Now again, I don't mean their own people from a 20th century broad paintbrush sense. I mean their own people from a proper historical perspective sense. Let's look at Ayuba Diallo, who was a Fulani man from Senegal. Ayuba came from a very prominent family in Senegal. Ironically, he and a friend were near the Gambia River to sell one of his Mande slaves and got captured by the Mandinka. The Mandinka shaved his head to make him look like a war captive, hence making it legal, and he was sold in Maryland. Ayuba eventually acquired his freedom because of his intelligence and his wit. Notice, he wasn't kidnapped by the Fulani and sold into slavery by his own people. Why didn't the Fulani capture and sell other Fulani? Well, because that would have been stupid. Now let's take another African into consideration, Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Sarah was a real live African princess of the Yoruba people who was orphaned due to intertribal warfare and sold into slavery. In 1848, the Yoruba were attacked by the Fon people from the kingdom of Dahomey. Sarah lost her parents and became a slave to King Gezo of Dahomey. In a remarkable twist of events, she was liberated from enslavement and became a goddaughter to Queen Victoria, as she took an interest in her due to her exceptional intelligence. So with these two cases, what have we learned? Well, the majority of enslaved people came through warfare, specifically war captives, and they were enslaved due to rivaling ethnic groups vying for power. If we are to be genuine scholars, we will realize that these people were not sold into slavery or enslaved by their own people, but by people who obviously viewed them as other. So why do people persist on simplifying this complex social structure of West Africa? Well, because it's always been easy to disparage and disrespect the culture, the worldview, and the humanity of African people. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you guys want access to